shall return.
Floating inside a metal capsule 250,000 miles away, Earth shrinks into a fragile sphere swallowed by an absolute black void. For 53 years, human spaceflight remained safely confined to our low orbital backyard. That era ends with the 4 astronauts of Artemis II. According to official space agency flight data, this crew shattered the distance record set by Apollo 13. They pushed into a brutal domain where galactic cosmic radiation physically manifests as blinding flashes inside their retinas. And where communication suffers total radio silence. What they documented on the battered, heavily cratered lunar far side was not merely a massive geological anomaly. What they saw next would change everything we thought we knew. The journey begins not with silence, but with the most powerful and controlled explosion in human history. The Space Launch System rocket ignites with a fury that shakes the very bedrock of the launch pad. Inside the Orion capsule, the 4 astronauts of Artemis II are pinned into their seats by a staggering 8.8 million pounds of thrust. This is not a gentle ascent. The physical toll is immense. The crushing gravitational force compresses their chests as the vehicle tears through the dense layers of the atmosphere. Every vibration of the solid rocket boosters translates into a violent shudder through the crew cabin. They are riding a monumental engine into the sky, ascending at a rate that rapidly strips away the familiar blue and replaces it with the stark black of the cosmos. Once the initial violence subsides, the Orion spacecraft enters a high Earth orbit. Here, the crew spends approximately 1 full day and a half testing critical life support systems, suspended in a realm far above the operational ceiling of the International Space Station. From this unprecedented vantage point, the Earth is no longer a sprawling, infinite landscape. It reveals itself as a finite, interconnected planetary system. The astronauts look down upon the swirling white vortexes of massive storm clouds forming over the dark oceans. When they pass into the orbital night, the planet comes alive with electromagnetic phenomena. They witness the ethereal, glowing ribbons of auroral displays, solar winds interacting with the upper atmosphere, dancing in brilliant greens across the polar regions. It is a period of profound, breathtaking awe. But this elliptical high Earth orbit is merely a temporary staging ground. The true departure begins with a critical maneuver known as the translunar injection. The interim cryogenic propulsion stage, the upper segment of the rocket, ignites its main engine for one final, extended burn. This continuous thrust accelerates the Orion spacecraft to staggering speeds, pushing it to the required escape velocity of approximately 24,500 miles per hour. This precise injection of kinetic energy is what allows the capsule to finally tear away from the dominant gravitational grip of Earth. The engine cutoff marks the definitive point of no return. The spacecraft is now officially coasting on a translunar trajectory into deep space, entirely committed to the void. As the hours pass, the physical reality of their trajectory begins to manifest visually. Looking backward through the windows of the Orion module, the crew watches their home planet actively shrink. The massive globe that once filled their entire field of view slowly diminishes to the size of a basketball, then a baseball, and eventually a fragile, glowing marble suspended in an ocean of absolute nothingness. The psychological transition from pure awe to a deep, creeping sense of unsettling isolation is unavoidable. The protective cocoon of the biosphere is gone. The distance grows exponentially with every passing second, emphasizing the profound vulnerability of 4 humans sealed inside a pressurized metal shell. The sheer, incomprehensible scale of the abyss surrounding them becomes an inescapable presence. We often romanticize space travel, but the terrifying truth is, once you pass the Van Allen belts, the universe stops being a painting and becomes a hostile void. As the Orion spacecraft slowly drifts through the vast, empty expanse between the Earth and the Moon, the crew enters a completely different physical environment. They have entirely breached the protective magnetic shield of our planet, leaving the safety of the magnetosphere far behind. This is the realm of deep cislunar space, and here, the astronauts are forced to confront the brutal reality of interplanetary space weather. The cosmic void is not empty. It is heavily saturated with highly energetic, invisible hazards known as galactic cosmic rays. These are not rays in the traditional sense, but microscopic, heavy atomic nuclei and protons, traveling at velocities approaching the speed of light, hurled continuously across the universe by ancient supernova explosions and distant stellar events. To monitor this silent, unrelenting assault, the Orion capsule is equipped with a highly specialized instrument called the Hybrid Electronic Radiation Assessor. This advanced device continuously measures the charged particle radiation environment inside the cabin. The data from the Hybrid Electronic Radiation Assessor confirms a terrifying physical reality. The radiation environment out here is radically different from anything experienced in low Earth orbit. The highly engineered aluminum and lithium hull of the spacecraft can effectively deflect micrometeoroids, but it is practically transparent to these extreme high-energy subatomic particles. The rays tear through the thick metal walls of the ship as if the physical barrier does not even exist. But the most disturbing manifestation of these galactic cosmic rays is not recorded on a digital screen. It is experienced directly within the biological framework of the astronauts themselves. According to official space medicine documentation and historical data from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, crews traversing deep space experience a bizarre and deeply unnerving sensory phenomenon. Even in the pitch-black cabin, when the astronauts tightly shut their eyelids in a desperate attempt to sleep, they are violently awakened by sudden, brilliant flashes of pure white light streaking across their vision. These are not optical illusions or psychological tricks of an exhausted mind. This is a direct, physical collision. The high-energy charged particles are shooting straight through the exterior of the spacecraft, passing cleanly through the bone of the human skull and striking the optic nerve or the vitreous humor fluid inside the eye. When these microscopic projectiles hit the fluid of the eyeball, they travel faster than the speed of light within that specific medium, generating a microscopic sonic boom of light officially known as Cherenkov radiation. Alternatively, the particles directly trigger the retinal nerves. The astronauts are physically feeling the lethal radiation of deep space detonating within their own nervous systems. When I review the technical reports detailing this exact biological interaction, it profoundly underscores the terrifying fragility of human life. We engineer massive rockets with millions of pounds of thrust, yet our delicate biological structures are fundamentally defenseless against the macroscopic physical forces of the wider cosmos. We are essentially sending soft, vulnerable tissue into a microscopic firing squad, and there is nowhere to hide. The invisible particles serve as a relentless reminder that we are entirely out of our natural element, intruding into a domain that is actively hostile to carbon-based life forms. Imagine trying to sleep while invisible particles trigger explosions of light inside your own eyes. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Am I the only one who finds this deeply unsettling? But what no one expected was how quickly the psychological toll sets in. Little did they know, The real test of endurance was waiting for them at the lunar horizon. As the Orion spacecraft hurtles further outward, it approaches the apollune, the absolute point of maximum distance in its translunar trajectory. The precise orbital mechanics, calculated by engineers back on Earth, dictate a path that carries the vehicle directly behind the massive, dense, rocky body of the Moon. From the vantage point of the crew cabin windows, the brilliant blue and white sphere of Earth slowly descends toward a jagged, gray, alien horizon. The visual connection to home is physically severed as the planet slips entirely out of view. But the loss of the visual Earth is only the preliminary phase of a much more profound and terrifying isolation. In deep space navigation, communication with mission control is maintained through highly directed beams of electromagnetic radiation, specifically utilizing the S-band and Ka-band radio frequencies. The S-band handles critical telemetry, tracking, and voice communications, while the Ka-band is responsible for transmitting massive amounts of data, including high-definition video. However, these specific wavelengths of light require a direct, unobstructed line of sight between the communication antennas on the spacecraft and the massive dish receivers of the deep space network located back on Earth. As the Orion capsule completely crosses the boundary of the lunar horizon, an event officially designated by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration as loss of signal begins. The immense physical mass of the Moon, roughly 73 quintillion kilograms of solid silicate rock, regolith, and an iron-rich core, moves directly between the spacecraft and Earth. Because high-frequency radio waves cannot penetrate dense planetary matter, this enormous celestial body acts as an impenetrable, planet-sized shield against all incoming and outgoing electromagnetic transmissions. Inside the crew cabin, the continuous, reassuring stream of digital telemetry pings from the flight directors in Houston begins to rapidly degrade. The once crisp audio transmissions become garbled, abruptly consumed by the harsh hiss of static, and then completely terminate. There is absolute, unrelenting silence. The data link screens display lost connections. For the next 45 minutes, the 4 astronauts are plunged into a state of total, unmitigated communication blackout. They are utterly isolated, physically and digitally disconnected from the other 8 billion human beings alive. There is no internet access, no global positioning system to provide coordinates, and no possibility of receiving emergency commands or advice from the ground control team. Every breath they take depends on machinery that cannot be diagnosed or repaired by the brilliant minds in Houston. If a critical anomaly occurs now, they are entirely on their own to solve it. The only auditory feedback remaining in their pressurized environment is the low, monotonous, mechanical hum of the environmental control and life support system fans, tirelessly circulating the oxygen required to keep their biological functions running in the deadly vacuum of space. It is precisely during this chilling period of absolute radio silence that the crew achieves a monumental historical and scientific milestone, sweeping through the most remote segment of their free return trajectory. The Orion spacecraft officially shatters the maximum distance record inadvertently set by the Apollo 13 mission over 5 decades ago. While Apollo 13 reached its record out of a desperate need to loop around the Moon and survive a catastrophic failure, the crew of Artemis II crosses this threshold by design. They are now suspended at a staggering distance of more than 400,000 kilometers away from the surface of their home planet. No human beings in the entire history of our species have ever ventured this deep into the unforgiving cosmic ocean. This is where the story takes a cosmic turn. In the deafening silence of the lunar far side, they didn't just find darkness. They found a graveyard of celestial violence. For over half a century, the hidden hemisphere of our lunar companion has been shrouded not just in mystery, but predominantly in physical darkness during human visitation. When the pioneers of the Apollo program traversed the lunar far side, they typically sailed through an ocean of pitch-black shadow, their visual field dominated only by the cold, distant light of the Milky Way galaxy. The massive bulk of the moon completely blocked the sun. However, the precise orbital mechanics calculated for this modern era dictated a drastically different physical reality for the 4 astronauts aboard Artemis II. Their translunar trajectory was timed perfectly to coincide with a waning gibbous lunar phase. This specific geometric alignment of the solar system means that as the Orion spacecraft crosses the threshold of the far horizon, the crew is not plunged into the expected darkness. Instead, the relentless, unfiltered, and blindingly bright light of the sun strikes the far side of the moon directly. They are forced to witness the most brutal geological record in the inner solar system, fully illuminated in stark, high-contrast detail. What is suddenly revealed beneath the windows of the crew cabin is fundamentally alien, even compared to the familiar face of the moon we observe every night from the surface of the Earth. The near side is somewhat pacified, smoothed over by the vast, dark plains of solidified volcanic lava known formally as Lunar Maria. The far side possesses almost none of these calming, flat features. What the Artemis II crew looks down upon is an absolute geological nightmare. It is an unbroken, terrifying testament to the chaotic, unyielding violence of our early cosmos. Every single square kilometer of the surface is pulverized, battered, fractured, and torn apart. It is a terrifying expanse defined entirely by continuous, overlapping destruction. Dominating this brightly lit, chaotic vista is a geological structure of truly incomprehensible scale and violence, the ORIENTALE Basin. Stretching across the curvature of the moon for nearly 1,000 kilometers, it stands as one of the largest, most distinct, and most immaculately preserved impact features in our entire solar system. Unlike a standard, simple, bowl-shaped crater created by a smaller meteorite, ORIENTALE is a massive, complex, multi-ring concentric structure. It resembles a gigantic, terrifying cosmic bullseye permanently stamped into the silicate crust of the moon. Looking down at this colossal, circular wound from their orbital vantage point, the crew witnesses a geographical anomaly that completely defies standard human comprehension. The sheer volume of the displaced rock is staggering. As they pass over the outer impact rings, they see a wall of craters stacked on top of craters, forming massive, concentric mountain ranges that ripple outward for hundreds of miles from a central, obliterated focal point. The true cosmic horror of this landscape lies in its absolute permanence. Because the moon completely lacks a protective atmosphere, there is no wind to smooth the sharp edges, no flowing water to carve gentle valleys, and no active plate tectonics to slowly recycle the crust over the eons. Therefore, these monumental geological scars remain completely unweathered. The colossal cliffs of the ORIENTALE Basin thrust upward into the black sky, jagged, brutal, and razor-sharp. They look exactly as they did in the chaotic moments immediately following the cataclysmic impact roughly 3.8 billion years ago. Looking at the sheer, frozen violence of this basin, the human mind struggles to process the apocalyptic kinetic energy released when that ancient, massive asteroid struck. It was an event of such unimaginable fury that upon the exact moment of impact, the solid lunar crust instantly liquefied, and the sky turned blood red as molten rocks rained down across the primordial surface. What the astronauts are staring at through the thick glass of their capsule is not merely a geographic landscape, it is the pure, unadulterated violence of the universe, instantly flash-frozen in the cold vacuum of space and perfectly preserved in complete silence for billions of years. Every answer opens 3 more questions. Looking at this frozen apocalypse, you realize how fragile our own planet really is.
The Orion spacecraft
representing the absolute pinnacle of 21st century aerospace engineering, arrives at the most critical juncture of the Artemis II mission. Yet, in a counterintuitive twist of spaceflight protocol, at this exact life-or-death moment, the massive main engines do not ignite. There is no roar of combustion, no vibration of thrusters attempting to alter their fate. The propulsion systems remain entirely dormant. The spacecraft is coasting silently, surrendering completely to a state of absolute freefall. This silent plummet is the defining characteristic of a free return trajectory. Rather than utilizing volatile chemical propellants to brake and insert the vehicle into a stable lunar orbit, the flight directors have entrusted the survival of the crew to the unyielding rules of physics. They are relying explicitly on the fundamental laws of motion and universal gravitation formulated by Sir Isaac Newton over 3 centuries ago. The astronauts are no longer pilots commanding a machine. They are vulnerable passengers bound entirely by the rigid, unforgiving mathematics of celestial mechanics. As the Orion capsule plunges deeper into the gravitational well of the Moon, an astonishing physical interaction occurs. The immense, concentrated mass of the lunar body acts as a colossal, invisible arm reaching out through the vacuum. This invisible force physically grips the spacecraft, a densely packed vessel weighing tens of thousands of pounds, and aggressively bends its linear path into a razor-sharp arc. This highly calculated maneuver is scientifically classified as a gravity assist. By flying precisely behind the orbital path of the Moon, the spacecraft successfully steals a microscopic fraction of lunar orbital energy. Like a heavy metallic stone loaded into the pouch of a celestial slingshot, Orion is violently whipped around the far side. The gravitational field pulls the capsule inward, swings it rapidly around the dark curvature, and violently hurls it back toward Earth, accelerating the vehicle to terrifying speeds that would require an impossible volume of onboard rocket fuel to replicate. The sheer visual awe of this maneuver is entirely eclipsed by the terrifying mathematical precision it demands. The horrifying reality of orbital mechanics is that it leaves absolutely zero margin for human error. If the initial translunar trajectory calculated back on Earth was misaligned by even a microscopic fraction of a single degree, the resulting amplification of that error during the slingshot phase would be instantly catastrophic. If their velocity was slightly too slow, or their approach angle too steep, the invisible arm of gravity would pull them into a permanent death spiral, driving the Orion capsule directly into the razor-sharp, shattered cliffs of the lunar surface. Conversely, if their approach was too shallow or their speed too fast, the lunar gravity would fail to capture them entirely, permanently flinging 4 human beings out into the endless, freezing abyss of deep space with absolutely no hope of retrieval. The Orion spacecraft finally clears the immense physical obstruction of the lunar mass. The agonizing 45 minutes of absolute, terrifying silence finally shatters. The high-frequency communication systems automatically re-engage with the deep space network. A sudden, sharp burst of static crackles through the crew headsets, immediately followed by the crisp, unmistakable, and deeply reassuring voice of the capsule communicator stationed at Mission Control in Houston. This precise technical moment, officially classified by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration as the acquisition of signal, signifies that the spacecraft has successfully survived the most perilous mechanical phase of the mission. The overwhelming, suffocating tension inside the pressurized cabin instantly breaks, replaced by a profound wave of collective relief as the digital umbilical cord to humanity is firmly re-established. But the true resolution of this orbital trial is not auditory. It is deeply visual. As the Orion capsule continues its sweeping trajectory away from the far hemisphere, the crew looks out through the thick glass windows of the module. Immediately below them lies the stark, desolate, and heavily cratered gray horizon of the Moon, an endless expanse of completely dead, pulverized silicate rock, devoid of any color, warmth, or atmosphere. And then, from behind this bleak and lifeless curvature, an absolutely breathtaking celestial phenomenon begins to unfold. a brilliant, glowing sphere of deep ocean blue, continental brown, and swirling atmospheric white slowly ascends into the infinite pitch-black void. They are witnessing an Earthrise. The psychological impact of this specific visual contrast is scientifically documented, but emotionally staggering. A single, weightless teardrop escapes the eye of an astronaut, floating freely in the microgravity environment of the cabin. In that one profound, silent moment, looking at that fragile, illuminated marble, they realize that every single human being who has ever lived, every historical empire, every triumph, every tragedy, and every breathing organism in the known universe is entirely contained on that tiny, isolated dot, suspended in a hostile abyss. Space psychologists and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration officially define this profound cognitive and emotional shift as the overview effect. It is a permanent, irreversible transformation in human perspective. From a distance of almost 250,000 miles away, the artificial boundaries and geopolitical borders that constantly divide nations become completely invisible. The incredibly thin, glowing blue line of the atmosphere highlights the terrifying fragility of our isolated biosphere. The crew of Artemis II returns not just as scientific explorers, but as permanently transformed witnesses to the extraordinary, precarious miracle of our only home. The Artemis II mission did not just test the limits of our orbital rockets, it fundamentally tested our fragile place within the wider cosmos. We successfully pushed humanity beyond the familiar shallow waters of low Earth orbit, looking directly into a terrifying abyss. The crew survived the invisible, relentless bombardment of galactic cosmic radiation, stared down the ancient, violent geological scars of the lunar far side, and ultimately surrendered control, letting the cold mathematics of gravity catch them and throw them safely back home. When reviewing the telemetry data and the profound human experience of this historic flight, what struck me the most was that despite the extreme, unforgiving hostility of deep space, there is a profound, underlying elegance to it all. The cosmic violence of the ORIENTALE basin and the 45 minutes of silent vacuum are not signs of chaos. The universe isn't broken. Our map of it is just incomplete. We are merely taking our first real steps out of the cradle, learning to navigate the vast dark. What do you think? Does this change how you see our place in the cosmos? I will keep exploring if there is more to uncover. Thank you for watching this cosmic journey. If venturing into the profound darkness of space changed your perspective today, please subscribe to the channel. Join our community of explorers as we continue unraveling the terrifying and beautiful mysteries of the universe. Stay curious, and I will see you next time.